What will you do when your money works for you? Welcome to the Resilient Investors Podcast, hosted by Victor, Kim, and Carolyn. At Resilient Wealth Planning, we empower clients to achieve a work-optional lifestyle, cultivating financial resilience against life's inevitable shocks and stresses. We are happy that you've joined us in the conversation. Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities are offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Resilient Wealth Planning and Cambridge are not affiliated. Okay, team, take it away.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Resilient Investors Podcast. So glad to have everybody back. Season 2, new year. And, of course, joining me as always, we've got Kim and we've got Carolyn. So welcome back.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, I thought we'd start by talking a little bit about some of the changes that we're making as far as the format of the podcast. So if you look at season 1 as all these different chapters in your library that have everything to do with financial services, whether it's financial planning, wealth planning, investment management, estate planning, and all the other facets of areas that we focus on, that is season 1. Season 2, I think the shift that you're going to start seeing is we'd like to get a little bit more conversational, a little bit more topical, and definitely focus on those areas that we think are very interesting to our clients and to the people that we serve as it relates to their goals, and making sure that we're kind of serving that purpose of curating the financial markets and what's being said as far as the financial noise, declutter all that, and then really home in on those areas that we think are important. Good. So with that, I think we'd kick things off just by basically saying, let's start off with a little bit of a celebration. So it was a little over a year ago that Techro Financial and Resilient Wealth Planning kind of came together under one banner of the Resilient Wealth Planning, which created the podcast. And so here we are celebrating 1 year of being together. But at the same token, we also had another great celebration that just took place over the weekend, and that is Nellie having her first birthday. So how's Nellie doing, Carolyn?
Our baby turned 1. Yeah.
I love that.
It's our baby. It's everybody's. She's great. She is thriving and slowly transitioning into toddlerhood, which is hard for me, but it's okay.
I think
it gets better with each milestone.
Sugar high.
Yeah,
that too.
And
lots
she
of
celebrated.
sugar.
What, she had sugar for the first time, right?
She did. Yeah, she had some cake with like loads of frosting.
That was so funny to experience. Have you given Nellie like a lemon slice? That's always fun to watch.
No, I should. I've heard. Yes, I would. I will make sure to record that and share that with everybody, because I think that's.
Yeah, my niece and my kids remember when I used to give them capers just to see what their reaction would be. They're so.
Yeah, and for those. I should say that for those of you that are joining us maybe for the first time or so or unaware, Carolyn has 2 kids, 2 little girls, beautiful. One just celebrated her first birthday. And Mara, how old is Mara now? She's in
3.5.
3.5, big sister. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, of course, Kim and I will date ourselves. We have 2 older kids, a boy and a girl. Girl's 24, son's 20. He's still off in college and such. And so I think that adds, some perspective from the standpoint that we're talking about. Taking a lens or how we frame things. We're thinking of it from our perspective with, young adults, and then you have young children. So obviously our takes on different things could be quite different as a result, but obviously cover and encompass, the wide variety of clients and people that we serve.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
which
that was
goes
one
back
milestone.
to one of the reasons why we are here together, right? Is to provide multiple generations in our practice and in our thought diversity.
Agreed.
Yeah, we also had a sadder milestone that took place over the course of the weekend. And that is that our dog of 15 years, Nano the super dog, sadly passed away after giving us 15 years of joy and showing us so much unconditional love. And so shout out to Nano. He was a social media influencer. He was part of the team. Actually, he used to be on the website for Techro Financial as our We used to use him as a comfort dog, to kind of help clients who are a little bit apprehensive and thinking about the financial markets. Nano filled that role of making them feel a little bit more comfortable, and so we'll miss Nano. We'll remember him and obviously celebrate him. He's off in doggy heaven, probably making everyone smile because that's the kind of dog he was.
His legacy lives on, you guys.
And as my neighbor pointed out, he is now free to run wild wherever his heart contents, because he was a runner.
He was. He was. After a while, people stopped calling us and telling us that Nano was out on the loose. They would actually just bring him over and drop him off at the front, knock on the door and say, "Here's Nano again." And of course, he was always smiling. Whenever we did get calls whenever I did get calls or texts, because my phone number was on his tag from people, it was always the same voicemail. It was always the same kind of conversation. It's like, "I think I have your dog Nano." Yeah, I found him on the path. He's all alone, and I don't see that he has it looks like he might be looking for some. He goes, "He's so friendly, though. I mean, he's a great dog." And then I'd meet the people. So after a while, like, everybody knew, that's Nano. He lives on La Escuela Court, to bring him home. So yeah, we'll miss our little dog. Big part of the family.
Real quick, before we dive into things, how did you guys come up with the name Nano?
We didn't. We adopted him from a neighbor, and that was his name already. So we just said, from a continuity standpoint, we kept it as Nano. I mean, some would argue because he was such a lover. I mean, he loved everybody and everything. We could have probably renamed him Guido or something a little bit more fitting to his approach to life. Yeah, so we coined him Nano Superdog, and I'm not kidding that he was a little bit, I wouldn't say an influencer, but early in the days of Twitter, when we had Nano, I actually created a Twitter account for Nano, Nano the Superdog, and it's still active. He did his last post right before he passed away, and one New Year's Eve in New York City, they were doing a promotion for the people who were watching the New Year in Times Square, and they used like a hashtag. I can't remember what it was, but it was hashtag this, and they encouraged people all over the country to tweet something, use that hashtag, and they would actually display it up in New York, on Times Square in New York City, as part of the celebration, kind of bringing in the whole country into the new year with the celebration. And so I did. I went ahead and posted on behalf of Nano, wishing everybody a happy new year. It was him wearing a bow tie. Went out, and then moments later, I received a text, or I received a notification that his picture was actually shown in Times Square. And what they did is they took a photograph, and then you could see it on the side of a building. Big, huge picture of Nano wishing everybody a happy new year. So when I showed this to the kids, they were freaking out because they had been to New York and they knew about Times Square, and they couldn't believe that their dog was, on Times Square where thousands of people were like seeing his picture. So yeah. So rest in peace, Nano.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so now we got to get into the real subjects. And so I thought I'd start, talking about topical subjects. And Carolyn, you brought to us, looks like we might have a new Fed nominee that's going to go through the process. So Kevin Warsh, let's talk about that.
Yeah,
that's a big
Kevin
news.
Warsh.
Yeah.
It is big news. Yeah, I was really excited to bring this topic to the table because I think it's timely, but I think we can also kind of construct it or have a conversation around like, okay, well, what's the purpose of the Fed? How does the process work to become a Fed chair? And then, so really excited. Yeah, Kevin Warsh, guys. Fun fact, I think if he's not the youngest, one of the youngest to join like the Federal Reserve, he joined at age 35 when he first came on. I think it was, we'll get to fact check me on this, 2006, 2011. So fairly young. Yeah.
Yes. And, so he's been through the thick of it. I think anyone that carries the war wounds of 2008, 2009 knows a lot.
Yes.
But, and it would be remiss if we talked about Kevin Warsh and we didn't talk about what the original role of the Fed was when it was established. And it was established actually back in, I think, 2007, I believe. And it was established to be a lender of last resort to prevent banking collapses. It was there to stabilize the money supply and credit conditions. supervise banks, and provide a flexible currency responsive to economic needs. Because if you remember back in the day, I think that things were tightly the dollar pegged to the gold, and that was like a tight way. And everyone has always had problems with that. If you go back to the European Union and when they created their currency, in a lot of Latin American countries, it seems to always be a problem if you're not elastic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can't change things because of economic times. So I think that providing that flexible currency responsive to the changing economics is really important. And then later they came into this issue where they wanted to have the Fed also have that dual mandate, which everybody has heard. The words dual mandate, meaning really keeping after employment and inflation. And so I think a lot of what we're familiar with that started back in there were two things. The employment came in 1946, and in 1977 there was another amendment, but really those two were 70s was all about inflation. And so I think the Fed has always been in our current time there to kind of make adjustments for employment if there's a high level of unemployment. And also, as we saw in the past few years, the high level of inflation, we weren't used to that for a while. And then all this high level of inflation, and the Fed would do policy to kind of bring that down. And so that's really where we are today. And I want to go back to 2007, 2008, because I have a favorite economist out there, Art Laffer, was in the White House. He was an advisor to President Reagan many, many years ago. And they interviewed him. I really remember because 2008 and 2009 was such a scary time for all of us who were in financial services and everybody who wasn't in financial services as well. We didn't know what was going on. And I remember, I think Main Street was like begging almost. It felt like Main Street was begging for government to do something. And government relied on the Fed to do something. And I remember Art Laffer at the time, they were asking him, what do you think should have been done? And he says, I think everybody should have had a brown paper bag, put it up against their mouth, and just breathe in, breathe out. And that should have been the solution, because if we let free markets do their job, things would have worked out. Instead, what we ended up doing is pumping a lot of money into the economy through fiscal stimulus. That's government spending money on different things that they think are going to speed up the economy. And then the Fed went out and, bought a lot of treasuries. And anytime the Fed goes out and buys a lot of treasuries, what they're doing is throwing money into the economy. And so that brings us into the situation where we find ourselves even today, because once they set the precedents for that in 2008, they continued to do that over and over at every economic crisis was used, and more money flooded into the economy. And I've got a really staggering statistic here. The Fed's balance sheet has grown from $850 billion in 2007 to $8.9 trillion at its peak, just about, probably a couple years ago. I don't have that data on here, but that's too much.
Mm-hmm. And then the interest payments that come with paying back all that debt. That's not what we're getting into today, Kim.
But yes, the Fed's balance sheet has been enormously increased. And if you look and you read from the notes of the Fed, they've been mandated to do research on climate change, on inequality, on racism, topics that don't go with their original mandate, which was for monetary policy. They're either buying bonds or they are selling bonds to put money into the economy or to take money out of the economy, or they're changing the Fed funds rate in order to kind of play with interest rates, again, to tighten the economy or to loosen it up. Those really were the only roles they were. We can, their employment has expanded tremendously too. All of that has led to this whole feeling of mission creep, right? They're doing things that's not in their mandate. And so that's where we stand. I don't know if any of you were listening in on some of the congressional panels that were done on the Fed just a few weeks ago, and talking about this topic is that they've really gone out of control. And so I think when they were interviewing new candidates, I mean, this was a big topic that most wanted to see controlled. So here we are with Kevin Warsh. And actually, what I was reading is originally he was a big proponent of, loose spending and having the Fed do a lot of buying of bonds, quantitative easing in 2008. He liked it at first, but then he felt afterwards that maybe that wasn't the right policy. And that really, as I understand it, that probably wasn't what actually fixed our economy eventually in 2009. But so he had changed his thought process, which is normal. I think anybody in any profession, the more experience you have, and when you do something and you see the results, then you're able to change your mind if it didn't go as it should have. And so I think, so that was his position on that. Since then, he's been noted to be a little bit more hawkish. I think, if you are criticizing the choice of Warsh, well, you're going to say he's political and he's maybe too non-independent because he's appointed by Trump. But I mean, realistically, the other side would say that when it's the Democrats' time in the White House, so I can't buy that. It's going to be always that situation. Whoever appoints them came from the White House.
No, and I think all of that's a really good point to bring up, because I think the way that media is going to portray this is, okay, well, he used to have one viewpoint and now his position has changed, and they're going to try and tie that to Trump and, Warsh being a candidate for the Fed chair. But I think we just need to stick to the facts. And like you said, like opinions can change based on what we've seen, what we've witnessed. It's kind of like tying it to financial planning, right? Like you set something in motion, but we know that can pivot, that can change, or, you change your investments over time too. So why wouldn't your thoughts on the economy change? I think we ultimately need to just wait and see, right? And just let it be, right? So, the president, and maybe this kind of ties to, okay, how does this whole process work? And even taking it back a step further, where it's like Jay Powell's term was up, right? Like, yeah, there's a lot going on and a lot of noise in the media, but like just focus on the fact that his term was up. Somebody was going to be nominated. So the president makes that nomination. I believe they go in front of the banking committee, the Senate banking committee, for the hearing. And then, my mind is blanking. They have to be voted on, right?
Confirmed. Yeah, they get confirmed.
Confirmed. Thank you. That's the word. Yeah, so there's a process in place, right? Well, let's trust that the process will work itself out. I of course want to see kind of the consistency and just the facts behind his decisions. So, That's
There,
fine.
I think we'd all agree, and you hear a lot of this going back and forth, is that we'd like to see less politicization, if that's a word, of some of these roles that were created really to keep an oversight and a bigger picture for the good of the country, regardless of who's in the White House, regardless of who's in the majority in either the House and the Senate. Now, obviously, this being a presidential nomination does skew more towards whatever the political narrative or the political feelings are, as far as who's going to be the best person to ensure that my agenda as president continues. But we have seen in the past with other Fed chairs that they don't always agree or are in line and lockstep with whatever the administration is in there. And that it goes back to this person's background, it goes back to their experience, and more importantly, the people that they surround themselves that could provide guidance. So, even the Fed chair is exactly that. He's a chair of a group of people who all have their own opinions, and then they have their consensus, or they'll have their conversations that they meet regularly as to whether or not they're going to raise rates, keep them flat, or go down. So it's really, deciding on the person's going to manage that process, to be in charge of that process. And, we'll like you said, it's not a done deal yet, but it is. We were expecting, obviously, to have a new Fed chair, and we'll have to see exactly if this is the right person. And then I want to trust that the Senate Banking Committee and then the Senate itself and the people who are within Washington, who know these people much better than I do, are going to make a wise choice for the good of the country.
And I absolutely have to laugh at all of this because Powell was appointed or nominated by Trump as well.
Yeah.
And then Trump didn't,
He
like
just changed
him
his mind.
anymore. Obviously, for good or bad, I'm not going to go into what my opinion is about Powell, but obviously he was pretty focused on what he thought was right because Trump didn't like him in the end. And it was his nomination. So, that to me says a lot. And, the other thing, I wanted to say one more thing about the criticism of Warsh, and that was that, he's probably too young. He hasn't provided any alternative solutions to the economic situation we're in. Alternative solutions. This wasn't supposed to be creative, going back to the dual mandate and what they can and what they are not supposed to be doing. I'm like, let's get
What
back
are your
to the
options?
job. It's kind of like, black and white. You have a couple tools and you dial down, dial up, and then your big thing is your presentations and your speeches, right? That you're doing for the public. That is also out there on the records. But lack of solutions, you're not supposed to be creative in that position.
No.
Some would say that's what's gone wrong with them expanding their reach right now. And so, yeah, I have a hard time with that whole thing. I also think it's going to be tough because the criticism could be afterwards, like he hasn't done enough too quickly. I also think now that we have this large balance sheet to unwind that, I am a bit fearful if he was to just snap his fingers and all of that is gone. What does that do to the economy too? So I think it's always challenging. The devil is always in the details, and we just have to give them time and see things play out. Again, we like to have headline news and quick reactions, but everything takes time.
So I think before we wrap up the conversation of, the new Fed chair, I think it might even be worth talking about what could this mean for interest rates throughout the rest of the year. Is it too soon to tell? Do we think we're going to see one or two interest rate cuts? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see anything really happen between now and the time that, let's say the nominee gets into office, from the standpoint that unless, something drastically happens in the next couple of weeks, I think that the more prudent course of action is just to keep things as they are. They didn't raise rates at the last meeting. Or drop rates at the last meeting. They kept things unchanged. I think that is probably going to continue. And they're going to let, the new nominee to kind of steer the ship from here on out. I do anticipate that before the end of the year, we will see rates drop, but I see it happening with the next Fed chair, not Powell anymore.
Mm-hmm. And if they do try to get back to, the data that really is the determinant, employment and inflation numbers, we still have this gap in data from when the government was shut down. So I feel like they are really trying to let more data come out before they make another assessment. Half the American population thinks we're going the right way and is confident, and half the population is very fearful and thinks we're going the wrong way and lacks confidence. And so we really, this kind of goes back to a summary of what we are telling our clients in this first half of what we always are telling our clients is we're not going to let consumer sentiment dictate how we manage portfolios and how we advise our clients. There are certain things that our clients have control over, and that is, how much they save, how much they spend, and when they decide to start using that money for their retirement or financial independence, whatever it is. Those are the dials that they can play around with. And they constantly need to be monitored. That's why we're here. But to worry about things that are not in their control, sometimes I feel like that's placing an excuse where it shouldn't be. And so we have to go back to that. So getting back to this whole situation, how does this really pertain to you? And the Fed, I think they have to wait and look at the numbers. We're certainly looking at the data before we make any investment decisions. We're not doing this because we just happen to be pessimistic for the day, which is why we have an investment committee of 3 of us as opposed to just one person. There's a lot that goes into that. And so it's really important to remind everyone that.
Yeah, and I'd like to unpack that a little bit more just because, as Kim mentioned, and for those that may have not heard the podcast before or might remember from last season, we do serve as a 3-person investment committee. And so here we are at the beginning of the year. So Kim, it segues, the conversation regarding the Fed segues nicely into the investment review, our approach towards investment reviews and the financial narrative that we've established for 2026. Now, of course, this is always subject to change, just as things do change in the economy. But for now, as we prepare for our spring investment meetings with clients and doing a brief look back at the performance of 2025, and then also the outlook and the expectations for 2026, the guidance isn't just based on our own three's opinion. A lot of it is steered and guided very heavily by the economists that we follow, the money managers that we align ourselves with, often on different sides of the spectrum as it relates to their thoughts. Some pessimistic, some a little bit more optimistic, bullish, bearish. But for the most part, we're talking about people from Fidelity, Franklin Templeton, Lord Abbott, First Trust. Am I missing anybody? I mean, it really is kind of a curation of different ideas and approaches to it, and then from that, putting on our own spin or take on it just based on our own experience and the impact that it's likely to have on the portfolios that we manage. The good news is that the economic outlook for us, or at least the way we see it as a committee, is optimistic. And I'll say cautiously optimistic, which isn't too dissimilar to what it was last year. The difference, I think, this year is whereas last year we really did think, that there was going to be a possible recession or a much bigger threat of recession. The reports and the indicators and the strength of companies being able to maintain earnings and pay those dividends and be consistent on those dividends hasn't really proven off for us a darker picture than we might have anticipated even back in 2025. So as we look at 2026, the theme is that we're seeing a steady regrowth, and I use that in air quotes, a steady regrowth within the economy that's really picking up speed again. And a lot of that is because interest levels, as we discussed, are starting to level off. And we're starting to see for the first time that artificial intelligence is actually being put to use, and businesses are starting to adopt AI to run more efficiently. There's still a lot of speculation as to whether AI, is the be all AI for everybody. There's definitely some cost savings as it relates to maybe headcount in specific areas. But at the same token, it's really how do you monetize AI and broaden that appeal beyond tech to actually make it something worth talking about, beyond just speculation. So those are some of the areas that, we obviously are going to keep an eye on. We mentioned the Fed. Inflation is cooling down, which means that if the interest rates do get dropped, it's going to be cheaper for people to borrow money, especially small businesses and businesses across the country. If they have access to capital, then that makes it a lot easier for them to grow and reinvest in their own products and services and their own people. So we will start seeing a shift in the stock and bond markets as a result, because one of the stories that's been happening quite a bit for the last couple of years is that a lot of the giant tech names are the ones that were doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and they were getting a lot of results. So when you looked at the S&P 500 and you would see the movements in the S&P 500, well, that was because of the heavy weighting and valuation of a lot of these tech names. That didn't mean that just because the Mag 7 was doing good, that the remaining 493 companies in the S&P 500 were doing just as good. They were still contributing, but perhaps not at the same clip or moving the market as much as those Mag 7 stocks are. The good news is, as we look towards this year, and we started seeing this pattern start in 2025, that those Mag 7s were not making as great of an impact on the overall economy and the S&P 500 as were the broader market in general. And so there it becomes being very good and active management about picking the very specific companies, the other 493, that were actually going to thrive in the kind of environment that we are. So we feel very bullish right now, I'd say, on smaller businesses, traditional manufacturing that is starting to thrive as things start to reshore. And so it is going to be really an exercise this year of picking quality stocks or quality companies and being selective when it comes to the different sectors that we think are going to do well in the new year.
Yeah, well said, Victor, everything you said. And I would just say, if we were to replace the words AI and just say we have a new level of innovation, which we all know is artificial intelligence, then perhaps people wouldn't be so scared of what that means. I think of the last phase of major innovation being the advent of smartphones and then the advent of apps, where everything became so much more efficient. It created massive jobs out there and more opportunity for a lot of people. And I see AI as, yes, there'll be displacement, there'll be different changes in labor and all that, but AI is really just another source of innovation. And possibly that's why this economic expansion is expanding a lot more than we thought it would, because of the level of innovation.
Yeah. Well, and as far as to close off a little bit on the outlook, I think it's really important to note, and I want to underscore here, is do not get distracted by the noise. Okay, we say this all the time, and I think it's just important to always reinforce that domestic and international geopolitics are going to grab headlines, and you have to remember that a lot of these networks exist to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Okay, but when you look at the current environment, it does favor, specific sectors on the value side. International is doing very well. Emerging markets are doing well. Small caps have a lot of growth. And again, domestic manufacturing. So yes, there's a lot of distraction in the information, but when you start doing a deeper dive, things are much better than they may appear to be if you were only listening to the financial media. That's why I think podcasts like this and us sharing our own perspectives and views, just because we see it day in and day out, should be a great resource. And as always, we're open to questions. So don't hesitate to reach out, especially if you're an existing client of ours, if you have specific concerns of any area in the financial markets. But I cringe whenever I see, if I happen to be flipping through the channels into one of those financial media, and I'm just sitting there thinking, these people are doing nothing but scaring folks. That's not the right approach.
Well said.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Our goal is always going to be to provide, a consistent, steady flow of income, earnings growth, and create that resilient foundation for that long-term wealth creation.
We want resilient investors. We want resilient investments, period. End of story. And you
now, if you are interested in learning more,
this from your resilient advisors.
Right. So if you are interested in learning more, good news. If you go to our website, if you haven't already been there, and you go into Insights and follow our events, I am going to be holding a State of the Markets presentation. It's going to be on Wednesday, February the 11th. So I will create and share a link for you to register if you'd like to participate in that as part of the show notes of this podcast. Also, we will be recording it. So if you don't get to see it live, we will have a recording, which we will, once it's approved through compliance, we will put it on our YouTube channel. So just look for the Resilient Wealth Planning YouTube channel. This is the third time I'm doing this presentation. I did it for the first time a year ago, then did a mid-year checkup in the summertime. Here we are looking at the state of the markets for 2026, which starts to look at economic patterns that have been taking place. So I really look forward to giving that presentation. But like I said, if you're unable to join us live, there will be a replay that you can find on our YouTube page and also on our website. So I think that's it for today, as far as our first episode of the second season.
Great kickoff, guys.
Yeah.
So stay tuned. Our expectation and what we're looking to do is to release a new show every 2 weeks through your preferred, podcasting channel, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts. But more importantly, we are putting them all on our YouTube channel, which has other content as well. So I really want to encourage you to, if you don't use any one specific podcast medium, to check us out on YouTube. And then the last thing I'd say as far as the presentations going forward is, bring us your questions. Let us know if there's specific topics or information that you'd like us to cover. Even though we will be releasing a steady podcast maybe every 2 weeks or so, occasionally we're going to have some bonuses. So we've got some things lined up that we're really excited about bringing out to everybody. Those will be just bonus episodes, but we'll be able to promote them not only through our approved social media channels, but we really are making a push to do a little bit more on Instagram as well. So you can find us there.
Well, thank you, Victor.
Really excited. You're thrilled, huh?
You're great. We did great.
Well, thanks for joining us again for episode 1. Check us out episode 2, and I hope
Thank you.
In the markets.
Looking forward to the next one. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Resilient Investor Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. To get the latest updates from our team, please visit us at www.resilientplanning.com or follow along on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube.